Hi guys, I'm Talisa with Talisa Aquarist. I hope you guys are having a great Saturday. Today I am wanting to share with you some of my favorite tips for keeping a planted aquarium. Now just a little disclaimer, I am not a professional planted aquarium keeper. I'm still figuring things out. These are things that I have done that have worked for me, and hopefully they will work for you as well. There are a lot of different methods out there, so if you don't like what I do, there is someone on YouTube that does do what you like, and you can learn a lot from them. I do not do CO2. I do not add fertilizers to my tanks, so if that's more up your alley, if you want that really clean, just kind of sterile looking tank, definitely don't watch this video. That is not what I do here. My tanks are far from sterile looking, and they look like an overgrown jungle for the most part. So if you like the overgrown jungle vibe, definitely watch this video. So the very first tip I would like to give you for a planted tank is you need to have a very thick substrate. So start with the foundation of the tank, the substrate, what you put the plants in. And if that is good, then you should have very healthy plants and a tank that's able to thrive. Now I do the Wallstad method, or something very similar to the Wallstad method. I just use aqua soil instead of like organic potting soil, but either one works great. I'm not as big of a fan of the potting soil. It's just a little messier. But I think I probably will do a tank with potting soil in the future, just so you guys can see how I put that together and what I do with it, because it is a little bit different than using aqua soil. However, what I recommend is get a thin layer, like an inch of aqua soil, and put it in the bottom of your tank. And let me just show you. Down here is the thin layer of aqua soil that's capped off with sand, and that is capped off with gravel. So make sure you have a really good thick layer of soil, and you can see the plants in this tank are thriving. Well, except for the sad tiger lotus, it was thriving. I think it's lived out its days. But I have pearlweed and rotala and some dwarf sage in here as well, and maybe some other plants that I can't remember. Oh, I have some anubias on this driftwood, some nearite snails right there. But first off, I would start with a thick layer of substrate. And if you don't want to use any potting soil or any gravel, that is great. Gravel's not necessary. Now, if you don't want to add aqua soil or potting soil to your tank, you could just have a thick layer of sand and have a healthy planted tank. But it's going to take a lot longer. So sand does not have all of the organic nutrients in it, all of the beneficial bacteria to feed the plants, right? So if you don't want to deal with any dirted tank and just want sand for your plants, I would add a lot of root tabs. Or what I would do is I would just add Java fern, anubias, guppy grass, stuff like that that doesn't need to be in the substrate to grow. And it would pull all the nutrients from the water instead of the substrate. And after about a year or so, you should have a lot of mold build up on the top of your sand. And then you can start adding plants, because the sand now has a lot of beneficial bacteria. The plants will be able to flourish in that sand. Now, I don't recommend doing this method, but you can do that method, just like you could do CO2 and fertilizers. I'm not going to recommend that because I just don't like it, and it's expensive, and you're just adding a lot of stuff to the water and then taking it right back out because you have to do water changes if you do that. Most of my tanks don't have filters, and most of my tanks I don't do water changes on. Now the water does evaporate out and I top it off with water, right? But anyhow, back to substrate. I'm going all over the place, sorry guys. I'll try to keep the rest of the video more organized. But yes, get yourself a very beneficial, like high nutrient, like 1 inch of soil. And then cap that off with 2 inches of sand, and that is a good base for a planted tank. And then from there, I would add a lot of plants. And you guys are probably asking, oh, what type of plants do we add? I prefer stem plants because they grow quickly, they pull a lot of nutrients, not just from the soil, but also from the water column, which is great when you're starting up a tank. However, every tank is very different. Some of my tanks, certain plants thrive in, and some of my tanks, the plants will die in. And I really don't know why that is, but every tank is different. So what I would recommend is go to the store, whatever plant catches your fancy, buy it, unless you know for sure that it needs CO2 to live. But most plants do fine in a tank that is designed with that type of soil, right? So I would go there and just buy lots of different stem plants. Some of my favorites are Rotala. I like pearlweed and Rotala, swords. I like crypts. I'm not as much of a fan of Boost Philandra because it just grows very slowly, but if you like that and want to add it to like your hardscape, it's adorable. You know, you should do that. I don't do that as much, right? It's just not my style. So that's some of my favorite plants. Oh, tiger lotus as well. I would highly recommend tiger lotus. They're beautiful. And also add floaters to the tank as well, whatever kind you want. I have a lot of duckweed. It's kind of a pain, so maybe go with like water lettuce or something like that. Water lettuce is very beautiful. It grows roots down into the water system and just looks really nice, I think. But yeah, do Java Fern, Anubias, all those things. Whatever you think you like, just add it to your tank, and whatever plant dies off, that's okay. Just go buy more of what you know does well in your tank. Or maybe the tank will end up fluctuating and the plant that died off a few months ago now thrives in the tank. You know, tanks are always just changing. So now that we have addressed the substrate and the plants, I would like to address something that's a lot more controversial, and that is filtration, water filtration, and water changes. Now, I set my tanks up in such a way that they do not need a lot of water changes, and they do not need filters for the most part. However, I do have one tank that could benefit from water changes and water filtration, and I'm going to show that to you guys and talk more about it as I'm showing you the tank. So this is the 20-gallon tank that could benefit from me doing water changes and me adding filtration. However, the fish would not necessarily benefit from that. As you can see, the fish are very active and very healthy in a tank that looks like this. If I were to do water changes and add a filter, it would purely be for viewing purposes only. The fish are very healthy in here. And the tank would look probably a little nicer if I didn't have so many fish in here. I do have a little too many, but because the tank is mature and established and has lots of plants, it's not harming the fish. There's not a lot of ammonia buildup in this tank. It is just fine. You can see they're all active and swimming around, very happy. And this 20-gallon right here, just up above this tank, is a tank that's been set up to need filtration and to need water changes. Now it is planted, but it has a lot less plants. It has a goldfish in here. Now I don't recommend keeping a goldfish in a 20-gallon, but you can grow out a goldfish in a 20-gallon. He's still little. I'm growing him out. You need to do frequent water changes for him to be able to grow very big. So I just wanted to show you guys those two examples of tanks that have been set up very differently from each other. They're both planted aquariums, but they have different types of plants in them, and they've been set up for different purposes, right? One is the purpose of growing out a goldfish, and one is for the purpose to not need any maintenance at all, and to grow out guppies and stuff like that. So use your best judgment on whether you use filtration or do water changes. I would say set it up like this tank right here, right? Where you have a thick layer of substrate. There's only one betta fish in there, which I haven't seen him yet this morning, so hopefully he's okay. He's getting a little old. But set it up that way. Very little maintenance. I love viewing it. And you'll notice these tanks behind me are not cloudy. And the tank that I just showed you, the 20-gallon, is kind of cloudy. And that is because the tank, the 20-gallon down below, I have quite a bit of tannins in there. There's some algae growing on the tank, so it looks a little worse than it is. The water would be clearer if I just kind of scraped the glass off and did a little water change. It's not cloudy in a way that's harming the fish. It's actually, the water looking like that is very beneficial to the fish. this tank right here, I just haven't added all the tannins to, and there's no algae growth in there because there's so many plants that are eating all the nutrients from the water that algae just cannot grow hardly in a tank like this. So all of that being said, here are some things that I would not do with my planted tanks. I would not just put gravel, an inch of gravel in my tank and just shove plants in there. I've done that in the past, and it is very difficult to grow plants in that type of substrate. Now, it's not impossible. I did grow plants like that, but it would take me about a year or two for the plants to really start being able to get established and take off, because it just takes so long for the gravel to start actually holding beneficial bacteria and nutrients to feed the plants. And it's just always cycling through the gravel. The gravel doesn't just hold that in there like the sand does. So definitely use sand. And I would not set up a tank and just constantly be checking the parameters. I know that sounds crazy and controversial, but once you get a tank set up, every tank is different, and you should be able to just look at your tank and see if it needs a water change or not. You should be able, if there's ammonia in there, you can smell it pretty quickly before it gets really built up. If your water starts smelling a little off, maybe it doesn't smell like ammonia, but it just starts smelling a little different, or maybe it gets just a slightly bit cloudy, just do a water change. Unless you see that the plants are still thriving and the fish are still really active, let it go for a day or two. And if it continues to persist, then do a water change. When you set up a planted tank that's very heavily planted, most of the time the plants can just keep those water parameters right where they need to be. However, sometimes the water parameters are all where they need to be, and something's still off with your tank, and you're like, I don't know, I think it just needs a water change. So I guess what I'm saying is just kind of, you'll create that like sixth sense with your fish tanks. You'll be familiar with the fish, the plants, the tank. You know what all you've added to your tank, and just develop that sense where you can walk up to the tank, look at it, watch it for a while. If you're anything like me, you just stand in front of your tanks for a long time and then be like, wait, why did I come into this room? I don't know. So just keep an eye on your tanks and do a water change if you think it's necessary, even if the water parameters are where they're at. All that, I guess what I'm trying to get at is checking your water parameters is not necessary. Now, if you've never set up a fish tank and don't know what you're doing at all, maybe keep a closer eye on that. But still, I would just do like, okay, I do, when you set up a planted tank, if you have a nutrient-rich soil, there's going to be more nutrients in the water, there's going to be ammonia levels rising, there's going to be algae growth. So just do like 2 water changes a week for about a month, and then you should be good. You shouldn't have to be constantly watching that. And if you're nervous about it, don't add fish. When you set up the tank, don't add fish, don't do water changes, just let it balance itself out for a month and then add a fish, you know. You don't have to do in-fish cycling like I do. I'm fairly familiar with the whole process now, so I don't lose fish doing in-fish cycling. They don't die. I just keep doing water changes if I think it's necessary. Another thing that I made a mistake in the past that don't do, so when you set up a planted tank and there's so many plants and there's so much space in the tank and you're like, wow, I should just add some fish because it would be so beautiful, and then you go buy a school of like 5 fish and just plop them in the tank, your water parameters will go all over the place. Your water will probably get cloudy, you'll get algae. Even if you're doing water changes, that still happens. I did that, and I added, it was a 10-gallon tank, so I really shouldn't have even been adding schooling fish. I know that now. The tank was too small. But I had a betta fish in there, I had nearite snails, and I should have left it at that. I shouldn't have had more than that in a 10-gallon tank. But I wanted some schooling fish because, like, oh, it's a 10-gallon, it's big enough for schooling fish. Well, it's not if it's a planted tank with no filter and you're not doing water changes, right? So I let the tank cycle itself a bit, and I went and bought some electric blue rasboras. They were beautiful, and I plopped them in the 10-gallon tank, and I did do water changes. It wasn't that I just wasn't doing any, but I plopped them in, and the tank started growing algae. It started getting cloudy because it was just too much in that tank for those plants to handle. I didn't have a filter in there, and they all got parasites, and by the time I got a heater where I could turn the heat up enough. The rasboras had died. Now the betta fish ended up surviving just fine, and the snails weren't affected, right? But you just don't want to overstock a tank, especially when you first set it up. Now I could have just added a filter and that would have helped, but it was still just too many fish for that size of tank. So some mistakes I've made is, I'll go over recap. Don't have a planted tank with just gravel. You can cap your sand off with gravel if you want to be pouring in water and not have to have something, you know, in the way of the sand so that the sand doesn't like move and let that soil out. So I have that in some of my tanks where I have it capped with gravel for that purpose, and it is easier to mess with, but it's not necessarily as good, so I probably won't continue doing that. And I have a different video out that I had made a while back where I had said gravel versus sand, so if you want to kind of know what I think about that, you can go watch that video as well. But yes, so no gravel, and don't always be checking your water parameters, and don't overstock your tank. I hope this video was helpful to you. The next slide, I'm going to just have a picture, and I'm going to have a list of all the do's and don'ts, just to cap off the video. You know, I've already said it all in this video, but just to kind of cap that off, and you can take a screenshot for any of you beginners who just want kind of a general rule of thumb. And thank you guys for watching this video. If you liked this video, if it was helpful and you're not subscribed, please subscribe. I post fish-related content multiple times a week.